She thought she had already won. She thought my daughter's house, my daughter's savings, and everything my daughter had built over 31 years of living belonged to her now. She thought I was just a grieving old man with nothing left but a suitcase and bad knees. She was wrong. My daughter Viveka died on a Tuesday in March. Pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the day I sat in the front row of a church in Decatur, Georgia, and watched them lower her into the ground. 11 months of watching her fight, watching her lose weight, watching her pretend to be fine for her kids. She was 31 years old. I am 64. There is nothing in the natural order of things that prepares a father for that. Her husband's name was Royce. I want you to remember that name. I had never fully trusted Royce. I want to be honest about that. Viveka loved him, and I loved Viveka. So I kept my mouth shut, and I shook his hand at Christmas, and I helped them move into their house in Decatur back in 2019. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming. Loud at parties, easy with compliments, the kind of man who makes you feel important right up until the moment he doesn't need you anymore. But Viveka was happy, or she seemed happy, and I told myself that my discomfort was just an old man's stubbornness about his daughter's choices. Then she got sick. The first thing I noticed was how Royce talked about money at the hospital. Not in the quiet, worried way a husband talks about money when everything else is falling apart. In a calculating way. Asking the oncologist specific questions about timelines. Asking the insurance coordinator about payout structures. At the time, I told myself I was reading too much into it, that he was just trying to plan. That's what husbands do. The second thing I noticed was a woman named Claudette. Claudette started coming around about 4 months after Viveka's diagnosis. Royce introduced her as a coworker. She brought coffee to the hospital once. Viveka was too sick to notice the way Claudette stood near Royce. I was not too sick. I noticed. But again, I told myself I was wrong. I told myself a man would not do that, not with his wife in a hospital bed 20 feet away. I was wrong to trust my better instincts. Viveka died on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Claudette's car was in the driveway. I want you to understand what the weeks after losing a child are like. The world does not stop. The mail keeps coming. The neighbor's dog keeps barking at 6 in the morning. You eat food people bring over and you cannot tell them what it tasted like. You sit in rooms that used to feel familiar, and they feel like museum exhibits of a life you no longer belong to. I was staying in Viveka's guest room because I lived in Asheville, and I hadn't been home since February. My daughter had asked me to stay close toward the end, so I stayed. On the 9th day after the funeral, Royce knocked on the guest room door. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and he told me it was time for me to make arrangements to leave. He said it respectfully enough, I'll give him that. He said he needed space to grieve. He said having me there was making it harder for the kids. He said this was still his house. I looked at him for a long moment. Our granddaughter Bess was 7 years old. Our grandson Cormac was 9. They were down the hall. I could hear Cormac's video game through the wall. I said, Royce, those are my grandchildren in that room. He said, I know that, and you can see them, but you need to have your own place. I left 3 days later. I drove back to Asheville with 1 suitcase and a box of Viveka's things that Royce had allowed me to take. A few photographs. Her grandmother's ring, which technically I had given her, so we couldn't argue. A journal from her college years that I found in the closet when I was packing. I did not know, at the time, what was in that journal. I want you to know that I didn't read it right away. I put it in the box and I didn't open it for 6 weeks because I was not ready. When you lose a child, you are not ready for very much. 6 weeks later, I opened it. The journal was from 2016 and 2017, the early years of Viveka and Royce's marriage. Most of it was ordinary. Her work frustrations, plans she had for a garden, a funny story about Cormac as a toddler. But in the back, she had written something different, a few pages that were clearly added later, the handwriting more urgent. She had written about money, about accounts she had been moving quietly for 3 years, about a safety deposit box at a bank on Peachtree Road in Atlanta, about a letter she had written to a lawyer named Mr. Now. Aldman, and asked him to hold until she was gone. She had written, "If something happens to me, Dad needs to know about this first." I sat with that journal on my kitchen table in Asheville for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I cried then. I called the bank the next morning. The woman at the bank was patient with me. She asked for identification. She asked for the death certificate, which I had a copy of. She confirmed that my name, along with Viveka's, was listed as a joint holder on the box. Royce's name was not on it. My daughter had done that deliberately and carefully and without telling me. Because she knew something I didn't know yet, and she was protecting me the only way she could from beyond the loss of herself. The box contained documents. A second insurance policy that Royce did not know existed in my name as beneficiary, worth $400,000. A property deed for a small parcel of land in North Georgia that Viveka had purchased in 2021 under her name only, never disclosed to Royce. A handwritten letter, and a sealed envelope addressed to Mr. Aldman at a law office in Buckhead. I read the letter standing in the bank. Viveka had known about Claudette since the previous spring. She had found messages on Royce's phone when he left it charging in the kitchen overnight. She had done what my daughter always did. She did not react immediately. She gathered information. She talked to a lawyer. She made a plan that accounted for the fact that she might not survive to execute it herself. She wrote, "I don't want to upset you before I have to. But if I don't make it through this, I need someone I trust to know the truth. Royce has been moving money. Not a lot, but consistently. He thinks I don't notice. He thinks I don't notice. He thinks I don't notice too sick. He doesn't know who taught me to read a bank statement. I taught her to read a bank statement. Her grandfather, my father-in-law, taught me." She wrote, "The house is mine, Dad. I bought it before we married. The deed is in my name. I never added him. I don't think he's ever actually looked at the deed. He just assumed. Men like Royce assume a lot of things." I drove to Atlanta that same afternoon. Mr. Aldman was a small man with very good posture and a quiet way of speaking that made you listen carefully to every word. He had been holding Viveka's sealed letter for 14 months. He opened it in front of me and read it, and then he read it again. Then he looked at me over the top of his glasses. He said, "Mr. Calloway, your daughter was one of the most methodical clients I've ever worked with. Viveka had left a will that Royce had never seen. She had executed it in 2022, 18 months before her diagnosis. In it, she left the house, the land in North Georgia, her personal savings account, and all contents of the safety deposit box to me, held in trust for the benefit of her 2 children. She left Royce her car, her personal effects, and $10,000. That was it." Her note to Mr. Aldman explained that she had suspected, even before the cancer, that the marriage was failing and that she did not trust Royce with the children's financial future. She wrote, "My father will know what to do. He always has." Royce did not know about any of this. He had spent the months after Viveka's death living in a house that was not his, planning a future with a woman who drove a used Hyundai, apparently under the impression that he was about to become a comfortable widower. When the will was formally presented, his lawyer called our lawyer, and there were several days of back and forth that I will spare you. Royce contested. Royce made accusations. Royce claimed that Viveka had not been in her right mind when she drafted the will. She had been. The will was dated 2 years before the diagnosis. And then he claimed that I had somehow influenced her, which was almost funny because I had not known the will existed until 6 weeks after she was in the ground. The contest failed. Georgia law was clear. The house was not a marital asset because Viveka had purchased it before the marriage and never commingled it. The will was valid. The insurance policy in my name was incontestable. But that is not the part that cost Royce the most. The part that cost him the most was what I found when I finally moved into the house to manage the transition for Bess and Cormac. In the home office, the room that had been Viveka's, I went through her files. Royce had clearly been through them already because they were out of order in a way that Viveka would never have left them. Viveka was meticulous. She kept records of everything, and what I found, underneath a false bottom in the bottom drawer, that I only knew about because I had built that desk for her myself 15 years ago, was a thumb drive. The thumb drive contained screenshots, 3 years' worth, messages between Royce and Claudette going back to 2021, and buried within those messages, a conversation from early 2023, 8 months before Viveka died, in which Royce had discussed with Claudette whether it was possible to adjust a sick person's medication without anyone noticing. He had not done it. Or if he had, the coroner had not found evidence of it. Viveka's death was attributed entirely to the cancer. And I have to believe that. I have to. Because the alternative is something I cannot hold and keep standing. But the intent was there in text. The willingness to consider it was there. He had typed those words to another woman while my daughter was in a hospital bed fighting to see her children grow up. I gave the thumb drive to a detective named Mr. Fenwick at the Fulton County Police Department. I sat across from him for 2 hours. I answered every question he asked me. I did not exaggerate and I did not editorialize. I simply told him what I had found and I let him look at the evidence. Royce was arrested 4 months later on charges of financial fraud related to the accounts he had drained during Viveka's illness and conspiracy charges related to the messages. I am told the latter is difficult to prosecute. I understand that. I also understand that he is no longer in that house, no longer near my grandchildren, and no longer operating under the assumption that the world will continue to arrange itself for his benefit. Claudette, for her part, cooperated with investigators almost immediately. I do not have strong feelings about Claudette. She made terrible choices. She is not my problem. I want to tell you about Bess and Cormac because this is the part that matters. Bess was 7 when her mother died. She is 9 now. She still sleeps with the stuffed rabbit that Viveka bought for her at a farmer's market in Decatur 2 summers before the diagnosis. She carries it in her backpack. I have never suggested she stop. Cormac is 11. He is quiet in the way that quiet children are quiet when they are working very hard to keep something together inside themselves. He plays chess. He is quite good. I sit across the board from him on Saturday afternoons and I let him beat me when I think he needs it and I make him earn it the rest of the time because Viveka would have wanted me to do it exactly that way. They live with me now, in Asheville. I sold the Decatur house, my right under the will, agreed upon in mediation, and I bought a house here with a yard big enough for a garden and a room each for both kids and a porch where I drink my coffee in the mornings and sometimes talk to Viveka in my head. She doesn't answer, but I keep the conversation going anyway. There are people who have asked me if I am angry. I have thought about this carefully. I am not angry the way I was in those first months. Anger like that is a fire, and fire is useful for a little while. It moves you. It makes you do the things you need to do, but you cannot live in it. I did the things I needed to do. I found what my daughter left for me to find. I gave it to the right people. I stood in a courtroom and I kept my face still while Royce's lawyer tried to suggest that I had manipulated a dying woman. What I feel now is closer to grief and closer to something I don't have a precise word for. Gratitude, maybe. Not for what happened. I would give every dollar and every piece of land and every legal victory to have my daughter back for one afternoon. I would give it all to watch her make fun of my coffee again. She always said I made it too weak. I still make it too weak out of habit. Some mornings I forget why. What I am grateful for is what she left behind, not the property. The evidence that she knew me. That when everything was closing in on her and she was making plans with whatever time and energy she had left, she thought my father will know what to do. She trusted me. She prepared for me. She wrote my name in documents that protected her children long after she was gone. I think about that on the hard mornings. I think, she trusted me. I have to be worthy of that. Last Saturday, Cormac beat me at chess for the first time without any help. He sat back in his chair and looked at me across the board, and he had the small, contained smile that looked so much like Viveka that I had to look down at the pieces for a moment before I could speak. Then I looked up, and I told him his mother would have been insufferably proud. He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him really laugh in a long time. That's what she left me. Not the house. Not the $400,000. Not the satisfaction of watching justice land where it was supposed to. She left me those kids. She trusted me with them. And every morning I get up and I make my weak coffee and I do my best to be worth that trust. That is the whole story. That is all of it. I keep thinking about the desk. I built that desk for Viveka when she was in her first apartment, 22 years old and just starting out. I put a false bottom in the bottom drawer because she asked me to. She said she wanted a place to keep things that were hers alone. I didn't ask what things. I just built it the way she wanted. I didn't know, standing in that garage with sawdust on my hands, that I was building the place where she would one day hide the evidence that protected her children. That protected me. I didn't know I was building part of the ending of a story that hadn't started yet. There's something in that I've been sitting with for a long time now. Royce was not stupid. He was smart enough to be patient, smart enough to be charming, smart enough to move money in amounts small enough not to trigger alerts. But he was not as smart as he thought he was. And the distance between those two things, who he thought he was and who he actually was, that's where everything fell apart for him. He assumed Viveka was too sick to notice. He assumed she would not plan ahead. He assumed I was just a grieving old man with nothing left. He built his whole future on assumptions about people he had never bothered to actually know. Viveka knew him. She had measured him carefully and quietly, and she had made her plans accordingly. That is not luck. That is what happens when a person builds a life on paying attention to the world, to the people in it, to the details everyone else waves away. She read bank statements the way I taught her. She kept records. She thought 3 steps ahead while she was fighting for her life. I don't know how she did it. I think about it and I don't have words for the kind of steadiness that requires. What Royce had was cunning. What Viveka had was something different, a clear mind and a conscience that told her what mattered and who to protect and how to do it even when her body was failing. Those are not the same thing. Cunning without conscience eventually turns on itself. It always does. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because the choices you make shape the person you become, and the person you become determines what you're capable of when things get hard. Royce, when things got hard, reached for shortcuts. Viveka, when things got hard, reached for her children's future. I am not a perfect man. I have made plenty of mistakes in 64 years. But I raised a daughter who trusted me with the most important thing she had. That tells me something about the choices I made when she was watching, when she was small, when she was deciding without knowing she was deciding what kind of person her father was. Kids are always watching. They're always making that determination. You don't get to choose whether they're paying attention. You only get to choose what they see. Cormac beat me at chess last Saturday. He had this look on his face, quiet, contained, satisfied, and it was so completely his mother that I had to look away for a second. Then I looked back and I told him the truth, that she would have been proud, not of the win, of the patience, of the way he thought it through. That's what I want him to carry. Not the money, not the house, not the story of what his father did or didn't do. The patience, the willingness to think it through. The understanding that how you get somewhere matters as much as whether you get there. Some mornings that feels like enough. Some mornings it's all I've got. I make my weak coffee, and I sit on the porch and I think she trusted me. I just have to keep being worth it.